Okay, good afternoon. Dan Henke with V-Twin Manufacturing. Just showing you guys out there a quick way of making a fixture to hold your Model 45 transmission case. This is an old Big Twin transmission plate, mounting plate from a Big Twin frame. And what I've done, I've added a third sector hole here to accept the Harley 45 studs as such. Now I'm able to lock this down and work. Okay, I'll just show you guys out there how to lock this down into the vise. Basically, it's an old footrest bracket that I welded onto the bottom of the Big Twin transmission plate. This allows me accessibility to lock this in and perform whatever service I have to do. Okay, we're about to set in the main drive gear into our transmission case. As you can see, I've just well greased the area and laid in all my needle bearings as such, ready for assembly. Now I'm going to add the respective main drive gear components before installation. I'll apply a little grease onto the chamfered teeth area of the main drive gear. I'll add my main drive gear race as such and its respective ball bearing. Now I'm ready to install. I have my small collar thrust. And we're in the proper position. We're now ready to install our seal. We'll now continue with our large support plate. Now, so we don't disturb our seal in any manner, shape, or form, this is the older Harley Davidson tool. This is like a pilot for the seal. Just add a little, simply add a little grease. Set our pilot into position. We're ready to install our seal, the lip of the seal out, not in. This is the back side of the seal, as you can see by the correction as to how it's crimped together. That will be your back side. This is a good quality seal, by the way. This has a sealant already from the manufacturer on the exterior. We're now able to install onto our pilot as such, carefully working it into position. It is now ready to be driven into position. I still use an old Victor seal tool installation piece from the 1960s, which I can come right over the exterior as such to drive. I'm going to step in front for a moment. That's it. I can now remove my pilot tool and we're ready to run. Okay, we're now going to continue the initial startup of phase 1 of the 45 transmission installation. We're now going to add our retaining plate into position. With the retaining plate in the case, we cannot work on the main drive gear. Being we've completed the main drive gear assembly, we're now able to install as such and then begin the final processing of phase 1. We'll put this into position, its respective hardware. This, by the way, is the Colony kit available from V-Twin Manufacturing. It's a wonderful product. It's made exact to the old factory specifications with the lock tang and the convex heads on the bolts themselves. So what we'll do is we'll put this piece into position in the transmission case with the lock taint. We're able to put this all into place, and now we're able to tighten the bolts and bend one ear over each flat to keep these from backing out. And now we're ready for assembly. That's it. To begin our total phase one processing here, you absolutely need your studs in the case. Through each step of the process of phase one, to determine proper end play for low and second gear as well as the main shaft itself respectively, you need these studs as well as all the screws. This has to be tightened through each instance. So as I say, we're going to install, we've got the locating dowel stud as I refer to it. This has a locating shank which will locate on the side cover. That begins up here, you might as well say at almost 12 o'clock. That'll thread in as such, double knot it, it'll thread in. And then we work our way around. This one does not, this is just a straight stud. This will go in here as such. These two will locate on the side cover from the outside in and are nutted at the back side, which you'll see in the next tape. Okay, now that we're all established with our main drive gear arrangement, we're now going to set main shaft end play itself. We select from a variation of 8 different main drive gear thrust washers. We select one. I usually recommend starting with the thinnest available. Place it onto the main shaft and install it into the main drive gear. I now, as I explained earlier, I have my 2 locating studs as such ready. I have my rollers on the sprocket side all greased and ready in my side cover, along with my locating studs proper, and I'm ready to set this up for the proper end play. Okay. I now install on the main shaft my outer thrust and outer sleeve or spacer. This would take up the place of a reverse gear if this were to be a reverse transmission, say in the Servi car. I'm now ready to install my side cover. This is tricky because I'm holding my needle bearings in place at the same time with my locating studs. It's a slow, tedious process, but it does work its way into place. Just take your time. I've got ample grease on there, as you see, and I worked it into position proper. The important point in all this is this cover has to be completely tightened as if in road use for each determination of end play. So we'll install our 2 back nuts here. These are a little tricky. You cannot leave one side of this loose and the other tight. This has to be completely tightened as if it was going down the road. Okay. Okay, I've got all my side cover screws tight. I've got my lower studs tight. However, these are not tight. I do not install a whole sprocket cover as such. I use these spacers to take the places up. As you'll see in a little while. Draw this up tight. Now this is all tight as if it were to be run. Now I want to check my end play. So I set up my homemade dial indicating stand. Again, I'm good and tight all the way through. Now we'll set up an indicator. Now I'm able to project my end play, as you can see. I'm a good 6/1000 end play there. Excellent shape for running on the main shaft, as you can see. See by the sweep of the dial. That's it. Okay, now what I want to explain here is the factory calls for between 3,000 to 5,000 end play. We're at all of about 6 here, so that is excellent. It might be a little more, but an old Harley Davidson rule of thumb is better a little loose than too tight. Never run something right within specs at its lowest point. Always allow a little running fit. That's an old, again, Harley Davidson running point, a good point to follow. Better a little loose than too tight. This particular transmission design, this is its widest point that it ever got. This began in 1941. And then a solo motorcycle ran through 1952. It then continued in a three-wheeler Servicar through 1973. It had a long lifespan with Harley Davidson. We're now going to remove our side cover again to set up our low and second gear end play, the final phase of the main shaft assembly. All critical points in building this transmission. I very carefully work this off, attempting to keep my gasket and all in place along with the needle rollers. Okay, we can just set that aside, keeping track of our outside spacers. We remove our main shaft, keeping track. Now that we've established this proper thrust washer, we make sure we keep an eye on that. We can add a little grease and make sure it stays up in the main drive gear, so we don't lose that somewhere in our travels. Okay. Okay, the determining factor with our first and second gear is setting the end play between the retaining bracket that you saw us install earlier. The determining factor is this particular thrust washer, which I believe is available in a series, I think we said 8 different variables on this. Okay, so low gear we set in our end thrust. There are no variables to that. It's just a thrust washer. So that would be first with low gear. We have a nice fit on that bushing. You notice the slot for oil for it to ingest down in between. We now have our thrust in place again in second gear. Make sure it's within its respective pocket. And now we're ready to try this out. Again, making sure we've got our selected thrust in the main drive gear. We now put this entire assembly into play. Now double checking, making sure we've got our thrust collar and thrust washer. Our rollers are still all greased into place. Our gasket is all still good. Our studs are all still good. We're ready to go here. Again, none of this is for the faint of heart. Okay, we'll set our screws into place. Each time a change is made, this cover has to be tightened as if for road use. Each time. Very tedious. Now our outside studs, as I refer to them, notice how they have a shank to locate in the side cover itself. They're nutted from behind with a lock washer and a nut. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these all have to be tight. We add our spacers, which will take the place of the sprocket cover, which we don't need in our way right now at this point. Draw them up. And now with a feeler gauge, we want to see what we have for end play. Between second gear and the retaining plate. We want to be able to come right in here comfortable. We're at 7 thousandths now. Thank you. Between the retaining plate and the inside of second gear. See how comfortable that is? We still got action going on. Again, the old rule of thumb, better a little loose than too tight. We don't want to see 25 thousandths there, no, but we're right at around 7. So we're in comfortable specs and we're freewheeling. Our phase 1 and phase 2 of this entire assembly is now complete.